this little guy right here is broken off inside the engine casting. What we should have is a full-size bolt like that, and what we've got is this here. This is probably one of the trickiest things mechanically that you are going to ever have to do. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do it, a bunch of different tools. I'll show you a couple of them. Step one actually is to take a pointed punch like that, and it's got to be a good quality punch, and you line up on the end of the bolt and you punch a little dimple into it. And the reason is that when you're drilling with a regular drill bit, the drill bit tends to want to wander around. It walks around on the hard surface of the metal, and so by giving it a little dimple at the very beginning of the operation, then the drill bit's going to track it straight. The tricky part is that when bolts break off, they don't always break off in a perfectly straight line, straight surface. And so I'm going to give you a sample on the blackboard of what you can do to help yourself get started. Alright, so this drawing is showing the surface of the metal part, and this is your threads going internally into the part. If you're lucky, when the bolt breaks off, actually if you're really lucky, the bolt breaks off way out here somewhere, and all you have to do is grab onto this portion of it with a set of vice grips and spin it out. If you're that lucky, go buy a lottery ticket, because it's your day. Usually it breaks off either flush or back inside a little ways. If it breaks off perfectly flat and smooth, then your center punch will find its way onto that surface really, really easily. Quite often the bolt will break off at a slight angle, and in this case we have that situation. So what I mean by that is that the end of the bolt actually has an angle on it like that. And simulating with a big bit here, if you start drilling straight in on an angled surface, the drill bit is actually going to walk its way down the angle, and you'll start boring out of center, and you'll actually start damaging the threads inside the engine itself, inside the part, which is obviously bad. So what you have to do is center punch, but look at the angle. You want your center punch to actually be 90 degrees to the surface of the angle. So we're looking at the brake surface there, and try to get centered as well as you can across this way, and actually put your dimple in at 90 degrees to the brake surface. And then when you start drilling, you actually steer the drill. You start going in this way, and once you've just made a little bit of progress with the drill bit, you start steering it to correct it up. Okay? So at first, your drill will penetrate about that far in, and once you've got in maybe about 1/8 of an inch or so, at that point the drill bit should be able to you should be able to steer it and start going parallel through this way. Okay. If you wait too long, if you over drill way back into here and then try to turn the bit, you'll either snap the bit off or snap the bit off, or almost guaranteed you'll snap the bit off, because it won't be a big bit like that. You're basically trying to bend something that isn't meant to bend. So back in here, where you've just got enough purchase from the drill bit that it's not going to actually ride back down again, while you're drilling, and drill bit's in motion here, you rotate it up, and the edges of the drill bit will actually cut up here, and it'll start to create a straight line hole for you, and then you can keep going. Okay, once you've got the hole drilled all the way through, or at least 1/4 to 1/2 inch in, what I look for is whatever the diameter of the bolt is. If you drill in double that diameter, that seems to be a fairly decent depth that will get you enough of a hole that you can work with. So in this case, this bolt's a 1/4 inch NC20, so being a 1/4 inch major diameter, if you can manage to drill in 1/2 inch, that's great. That works very, very well. I'm going to look at a couple of different extraction tool options here. This one is a very, very hard spline shaft, and what you do is you choose a drill bit that is the diameter of the round portion of the shaft, and then this is obviously too big for this hole, but once the hole is drilled, you drive that in with a hammer, and these outer splines will actually slice into the edges of the hole. And if you think about what they're slicing into, they're slicing into the inside edge of the bolt itself that's broken off. Then you select this little guy on, and he goes right over top of the splines like that. Now you can put a wrench on that, and when you turn that, these splines have bitten into the inside edge of the broken off bolt. Now you're turning that bolt, and you can twist it out. And once it's out, then you dislodge this from the broken bolt, and you're good to go. And I wish I had the size for you, but we've broken a few of these over the years, so that's what we're left with. Here's another option that works fairly well. These kind of look like drill bits, but they aren't. They're actually tapered, and they have a reverse thread on them, so they're meant to run in reverse. They're meant to turn counterclockwise. So you choose an appropriate size drill bit, and appropriate for these things means halfway up the taper, whatever the diameter is at the halfway point, choose a drill bit that matches that size, and drill in again, on a 1/4 inch bit. If you can get a 1/2 inch of hole depth, that's great. This thing, then you put it into a tap handle, and you push it in and turn it counterclockwise with your tap handle. Or if you can't fit your tap handle around here because the motor's in the way, we've successfully snapped a set of vice grips on the end of that and done the same thing. Feed it into the hole, turn it counterclockwise. Eventually this thing augers its way into the hole and binds up because it's a taper. And so it won't turn any further, and that causes the bolt to start to turn, and you'll extract it out. And we've had some pretty good success with these. There's another little wee one. These are available retail stores for about $7 or $8 a piece, so they're not too bad. These I've had the best success with lately. A whole bunch of them, different sizes. And they're sort of a combination of the two that you've just seen. So picture taking a spline shaft like that and a tapered shaft like that, and create a tapered spline that turns, but it doesn't actually have the spiral threads on it. It's got straight splines like this. And you guys will be too far away to see, but there's actually a cutting surface on the back side of these. And so stamped right on the outside of these tapered shafts is the actual drill bit size that they recommend you use. So this one is stamped at 9/16 of an inch, so it's obviously for large fasteners. So you would choose a 9/16 drill bit. You would punch a dimple into it to make sure the drill bit doesn't wander around. Drill your hole, and then this thing simply gets hammered into the hole. And you would pound it in until it interferes, until it binds up, and then you can put a wrench on the square on the outside, and you can turn that, and it will again start to spin it faster. Any one of these works pretty well. These are a little bit more expensive, but I've had pretty good success with them. The only issue with any of these extractor tools is that they create some outward force. I mean, it's a taper. It acts like a wedge. So it's going into the hole, and here you're trying to turn this broken bolt out, but the wedge action causes the bolt to expand in diameter a little bit, and that creates a little extra friction around where the threads are actually married together. So it kind of works against your intention. Right? You want that thing to spin out freely, but you've actually created extra friction in the threads. And so you have to make sure that these things are in there really, really well. Things that can help this, obviously, a lubricant like WD-40 or some sort of spray lube that will cause the threads to spin freely. Make sure that you add that after you've installed the tool, because if you put spray lube on it before you try to work one of these things in there, you're creating a slippery surface, and now this isn't going to bite into the surface as easily. So you add that afterwards. If it's a fresh motor like this that doesn't have really any rust on it, this should come out fairly easily. The majority of bolts that are broken off in real life are old, rusted, aged, bolts that are on a machine that's had a little bit of experience. And then you've got the rust to contend with. In that case, you want to pre-soak, get some penetrating fluid in there before you even start any of this operation, so that it can try to eat its way through the threads and free up the threads a little bit. In some cases, if you have an option to heat it up, even a propane torch helps, although you're not getting a ton of heat from a propane torch. If you've got an oxyacetylene torch, that's wonderful. Carefully play the flame around the outside of the hole. What you want to do is have the material around the bolt expanding to release its grip on the threads. Heating up the actual bolt itself is actually not what you want to do, because the diameter of the bolt is going to increase, which actually makes it tighter in the hole. Okay. Now it does still shrink back again after it cools, and you will get some separation there, but if you can heat up around the outside and expand the material away from the bolt, that helps. Obviously the stud, the bolt, is going to heat up anyways. I mean, they're contacting each other and they both are conductors. So you're going to have them get hot anyways. But if you can heat up around the outside, that helps a little bit. Let it all cool down. While you're drilling, you want to use some sort of a cutting fluid. This is Rapid Tap. It's actually intentionally meant for this operation. It's not a lubricant per se. It's not making the surface slippery. What it's doing is reducing some of the temperature that's created by the friction when you're drilling with your drill bit. And whenever you're drilling steel, make sure that your drill is on the slow speed setting. Okay? Always run with a slow speed, and you're going to want a nice fresh drill bit for this. If you run it at a higher speed, then you're creating more heat than anything. You're going to basically burnish the end of the drill bit. If you see the drill bit turning blue, there's your sign. If you hear squealing noises, there's your sign. So basically, load your drill bit, and on this one you've got the adjustable clutch on it, and if the clutch is back at a setting where it'll slip once you have friction, roll it forward so you're actually at the drill bit symbol, which means that it's completely locked and it will never slip. Okay? It's a variable speed drill. You can crawl all the way up to full trigger. When I'm starting the hole working on the dimple that I got from the punch, I'll crawl it at first fairly slowly, just to kind of make sure that the drill bit's getting its own start. Once it's got a hole, it can't go anywhere, and then you can increase your speed a little bit. But at first, go kind of slowly so the drill bit actually gets a chance to find its way into the hole. The Rapid Tap, your cutting fluid, you just put a drop into the hole or a drop on the bit. You don't need to be, dousing it. And then once the hole is running dry, once you start seeing a little bit of smoke from the heat, you put another drop or two on it. If you don't have this stuff, believe it or not, transmission fluid or power steering fluid works okay as well. What you don't want to use here is engine oil or WD-40 or penetrating fluid or anything like that, because those fluids are too runny, and they're meant to be slippery. They're meant to eliminate friction between sliding surfaces. You don't want that. All you want in here is a cooling effect, and the fact that the fluid sits on the drill bit, it will help the chips and shavings to extract out of the hole as you drill. Here's a couple of different extraction tools for the head of a bolt or the head of a shaft that I didn't show yet. Inside these openings are some spiral augers. So picture this type of extractor, except this is meant to go inside a hole, and this shape in here is exactly the same, except it's meant to go outside. So it would grab on the outside end of a shaft or a bolt head, or if you've got a bolt head that's been rounded off. And this particular one has a range of, this end here will take 5/8 or smaller. This will take 9/16. So this particular tool is actually pretty handy. It's got a reversing switch so that you can use it as a ratchet either way, on that side or if you have to switch to that side, then you reverse it and you can use that end like that. So this particular wrench actually has 4 different sizes on one wrench, and then this one here has another 4 different sizes on the same wrench. So those 2 alone handle an awful lot of different sizes. So this would be handy for where you've broken a bolt off but a portion of the threads remain, or a portion of the stud, the shaft remains. Picture having a piece of, you know, unthreaded piece sticking out like that with no head on it. You could hopefully grab it with one of these tools and spin it out that way. So that's an option. Okay, getting ready to mark your punch point here. If the surface of the bolt isn't perfectly flat, then the punch is going to actually want to wander and deflect off the edge of the surface. And so sometimes you actually have to punch at a slight angle and then steer the punch to make sure that the actual drill operation stays straight with the bolt. In some cases, you're going to need a tool like this. This goes into a Dremel tool or into a die grinder, and it's a little bit of a rotary cutting bit. And notice that the end is pretty fine. So if the end of the bolt has been broken off and it's not flat, then what you can do is dress off the end of the bolt very carefully to create a flat surface, and then your punch will seat and you can actually get a half decent punch point on it. So there's a lot of tooling sometimes that's required for these types of repairs. Just in case anything goes flying. And this one is not perfectly flat, so I'm going to have to drive at a slight angle. And initially I'm getting a small point just to make sure the punch is in the right spot, and then you can actually put a bit more oomph to it. Okay, rapid tap cutting fluid to keep your chips and shavings from sticking to the bit, and also to keep the cutting surface a little bit cooler so the bit doesn't overheat and blue, and it also helps with chip extraction out of the hole. Just a little trickle here and a little trickle here, and we'll add a bit as we go. Drill, make sure that it's in the lock position there. You don't want to have any clutch slip halfway through the middle of the operation. Speed select, make sure you're on slow speed. Drilling steel, go slow. You don't want to create high temperatures by high drill speed. Sometimes based on where your positioning is in the machine or in the mechanism, you got to change your grip on the drill quite a bit, and it's handy to actually learn how to drill with your finger, pinky on the trigger, and drill upside down like this, because in this particular case I'm going to have a lot of interference. Sometimes you got to learn to drill sideways. That's all just part of learning to adjust to the circumstances. I'm going to landmark off the side of the machine here, and initially all I'm doing is making sure that the drill bit actually starts and goes in straight, and double checking, and I'm actually centered fairly well there. Okay, a little more cutting fluid on there. And I'm running fairly slow. If the drill bit's sharp, you should start seeing some shavings come out. And there's some shavings starting to be produced. And double check as you go. Really important that your drill stays square to the hole. And this requires that your grip and your force is in line on the drill. If you're pushing up here where the handle is, your drill is naturally going to wander up like this. You may also start stressing the drill bit and cause it to break. So you actually want your grip down in line, and so it's part of the reason that I actually switch up my grip, is because I find it easier sometimes like this, hold the drill body in my hand like that. I'm pulling with my index, but I'm pushing with the palm of my hand back here to keep the drill bit nice and straight and in line. And by eye, I'm trying to make sure that I'm vertically square and that I'm also horizontally square, so that I go in the same direction the bolt. The paper towel in that dispenser up there.
Don't kick it though.
No. Yeah, there's one right here.
Oh, okay. Thank you. This is the annoying part, because this takes a long time. Just put this in reverse and spin the shavings off like that. Watching the clock, because halfway through this we're going to get interrupted. A little more cutting fluid on there. A little more in there. I'm pushing so hard my stool is sliding. Okay, something I'm watching for here. The shaving colors are starting to change a little bit, which is my hint that the drill bit is starting to wander out of alignment. Just a little bit. No, it's not bad. You kind of got to watch for that. If it goes off, remember, aluminum is much, much softer than the steel. So if the drill bit starts to go out of center, if it suddenly finds an easier path, it'll ride right off the bolt and go over into the aluminum. And if you're not paying attention to that, or you don't notice, you know, if all of a sudden the cutting starts to get real easy, like, hey, this isn't so hard after all. Well, it could be that you're actually boring into your motor and not actually into the bolt. And it just went from a level 1 repair to a level 3 repair. And some of you have heard of JB Weld. Doesn't fix everything.
That's funny.
I'm going to adjust my angle just a little bit. So you can see some actual pearly shavings coming out. That's a good sign. Bit's sharp. And it's cutting nicely. And I'm going to check the fit on the taper here. See if it'll grab yet. And right now it's still hitting the bottom of the hole before the taper grabs, which means that it's not deep enough yet, which means we have to keep drilling. Yay! So halfway through this job, you start thinking bad thoughts about whoever broke off the bolt, unless that person is you, in which case you just think bad thoughts about yourself. I wish that you hadn't done it. I'm going to play a hunch here. Sometimes you don't have to put the punch in very far to get it to do its job. That one is almost grabbed. There, if you hear the sound change, okay, at first it wasn't actually bottoming out, so you could hear an impact sound, but when the tone changes, that's the sign that the punch has actually hit the bottom. see if I get lucky. I was going to use that extractor. I'm going to try this one. All right, I've got a slightly larger tap handle here to grab the flats on this particular extractor, and I'm going to choke this down, make sure that we're grabbing the extractor, and I'm doing a little bit of a test fit. There. This is risky on camera because if it doesn't work, you're really putting yourself out there, but if it does work, then you're of course a hero. What I'm going to do is I'm going to push against the extractor while I turn it, because I want to make sure that it stays in tight. It sounds counterintuitive, you're pushing against something that you're trying to take out, but it's threaded, so if it actually does start to turn, then it's going to thread itself out even if you're pushing against it. The same way as for those of you guys that have driven screws with a drill, when you're reversing screws out with a drill, you push hard on the drill while you're bringing the screws out so that the drill bit doesn't slip in the head of the screw. It's the same idea. Make sure that your tool is bonded really well. And I can feel it starting to strip away, so this isn't going to work yet. But it was a good try. Yeah, I need a little more hole depth to get that to bond. That's about 1/4 of an inch in. Okay, that's where the friction point is, and we need to be up a little further before that'll grab really, really well. So I'll leave that loaded. Back to the drill. Get it a little more depth. No falling down on camera. You're going to want to move that location because I'm blocking it when I'm drilling.
I've got this
You
one.
got both of
X-ray
them?
vision.
Yeah.
Okay. X-ray vision.
Yeah, see right through you.
We'll get you a GoPro too.
Oh. So you can see how annoying this is and how tedious it is. Like, it's not an easy thing to do, which is why sometimes people pay to have this done, and sometimes you find free stuff at the dump because things are broken, and if you have the patience and the tools, you can actually fix stuff that somebody else gave up on, if you're into that sort of thing. And there's something to be learned here either way. I mean, it's really hard to take out a broken bolt. So when we do the torquing unit, and I have you guys following the torque chart and using the correct tightness for the bolts, now you can appreciate why that matters so much. Because imagine doing this on the engine of a car, and the engine's in the car, because it would cost thousands of dollars to pull it out, so you're doing something like this right in the car. That'd be horrible. Let me give this another try. If I can get it to seat in there. The tool's already bottomed out in the handle. It's going in a lot further this time. All right. We're going to We're going to resort to extreme measures. That was a little Rickyism, right? What I'm going to do is take this to the shop and warm up the outside of this a little bit with a torch. Aluminum is a very dynamic metal, so it expands very rapidly relative to steel. And so by warming this up a little bit with a torch, the diameter of the hole will expand a little bit and release its grip a little bit on the threads, and hopefully that gives us some success. So let's go to the shop and do that.